Okay. Okay. All right. After church, give me his name and I'll. So y'all keep that student in your prayers. Anybody else? Don't forget Mr. Ralph Jolly. Went and seen David Tierce last week. They're going to try to find him a house in Center, in that area. So they're going to try to move him down there. They're going to try to find one big enough that his daughter can stay with him if need be. Also, Mr. Ed Byers. We've got a couple of people in church that's going to be having knee surgeries. I don't know if they want me to announce it or not, but one of them's Kent Lee. So, and another one's Junior Williamson. So y'all remember them. They're going to be having some surgeries. Miss Sadie has got eye surgery in January. So she's going to be having eye surgery in January. And we got good news for Coach Bobo. He has to wear a heart monitor for about 12 days, but the good news is what, Miss Bobo? There you go. They found his heart. They thought it was a thumping gizzard, but it's his heart. So they're going to wear that for a few days, and maybe it'll show his heart getting under conviction about between 10 and 11-ish when I'm preaching. They'll figure out there's something there. But y'all remember Coach in your prayers. Is there anybody else before we begin, before we move on? We got?
Remember my son-in-law.
Sure will.
In Cuba, and we'll be down there like 9 months.
Okay.
On military.
Okay. Sure will. Anybody else before we continue? All right, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, if you stand with us, we're going to begin with page 182.
The book of Joshua. To the book of Joshua. Remember Christy and her family in your prayers. Funeral is going to be tomorrow at Carter Church at 2 o'clock. I believe visitation is going to be from 12 until 2. For the family, it's going to start at 11 o'clock. So just remember, Christy, she's, I don't know, she may not be able to attend the service tomorrow. She's got home, I believe, yesterday. So just keep her in your prayers, please. And not only her, but her daughters, her husband, the whole family. So y'all just remember them, and don't forget, funeral is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Book of Joshua. Book of Joshua, and also keep in mind Kevin Gardner and his family. Continue to remember them. Book of Joshua, a book of possession. A book of God keeping his promises. It is a book of a new covenant, a book of old covenants being reestablished, a book of new covenants being established. It is a book about totally relying on God. It is a book about being on the right side of, and I use this word in quotes, Jordan. It is a book about the effects of being content with being a follower of Christ, not wanting to go above and beyond. It is a book that is basically a book that is a challenge to Christians to never rest, to always keep fighting, to always keep moving forward. And we looked at just a few verses starting out in the book of Joshua, and of course his name means Jehovah is my Savior, and it is also a book of encouragement. And with the very first chapter in the book of Joshua, we find out in verses 6, verses 7, and also verses 9, it is encouragement. But also in that very first chapter, you have a verse of being content. And we looked at that last week, and it starts out actually in verses 13. And you can relate that back, and if you was not here last week, I'll kind of quickly give you the gist of that. You remember the Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They're about to cross over Jordan, is what the book of Joshua is about, the first couple of chapters. And Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh come up to Moses way back in the book of Numbers, chapter 32, and they make a request to Moses that they do not want to cross over to the west side of the Promised Land. They want to stay on the east side. And the west side of the Promised Land, or the west side of Jordan, is a type of God's blessings. The east side is a type of being content and just basically getting by. And of course, Moses informs them back in the book of Numbers, chapter 32, that is fine if that's what they want to do, but they are going to have to cross over Jordan, and help their brothers fight. And then after the land is conquered and after the land is divvied up, then they are allowed to go back across on the side of being content. So that is something that you'll find not only in chapter 1, but also in chapter 1 about the be strong, be of good courage. Be strong, be of good courage, and be strong and be of good courage. So he tells us now, starting in verses 13. Let's look at verses 13 of chapter 1 of the book of Joshua, a fascinating book. Very fascinating book. And it is also, we can look at this as a book of thanksgiving. In the book, and of course we've all last week went through the Thanksgiving season, and we're coming up into the holiday season, and it seems like the older I get, the faster it goes by. And you always, Crystal and I have said this 1,000 times to ourselves, it just don't feel like Christmas, you know. In actuality, we don't know what that should feel like. We should feel like Christmas, so to speak, every day, because we have Christ. But I understand when we mean that it just doesn't basically feel like it. But with the book of Joshua, they are about to cross over, and Joshua is going to get specific instructions from God. These are not going to be instructions on basically painting with the broad brush. It is very specific of what God is wanting Joshua and the children of Israel to do. And this is what he tells them starting in verses 13. Remember the word, Joshua chapter 1. Remember the word. And this word is going to be used throughout the book of Joshua. Remember, remember, remember. And I've said this before, and I think it's in 1 Peter or 2 Peter. I can't remember like I used to. When Peter is writing to the Christians, he said to put yourself in remembrance about the good things God had done for you. And we should always remember about what God has brought us out of. And we should not continuously dwell on it. We should dwell on the present and also the future. But it does us good to remember what God brings us out of. And with the book of Joshua, with the book of Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it is a remembering books because God specifically wants them to remember on the other side of the Red Sea. He wants them to remember about Egypt. He wants them to remember about the 430 some odd years of captivity. He wants them to remember that because as long as they keep that fresh in their memories, then they are going to be able to understand the blessings of God. But what happens between Joshua and Judges, something happens. They stop remembering. And they start focusing on the right now. They forget about what God has brought them through. And, you know, you hear of a lot of preachers, and I've said this before, I don't know if it's an unwritten rule or what among pastors or preachers that you don't repeat a sermon. It's just one of them unwritten rules. I don't know why, but if that was the case, then we should only read the Bible one time. You don't need to read it twice because you're just going to be reading the same thing. But that's what Peter was talking about. We need to remember, and he says, I'm going to preach to you a message, and if I preach to you again, the reason I'm preaching to you so I can refresh your memory on what God has done for you. So I think that's why John 3:16 is such a wonderful verse. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. How many times in our lives as Christians have we thought about that verse? And the reason we think about that verse and the reason we dwell on that verse because it puts us in remembrance of what God did on Calvary or what Christ did on Calvary for us over 2,200 years ago. So in verses 13, the first word is remember. Keep in mind, not only remember Egypt, but remember the word, remember the covenant, remember the promises, everything that we have talked about. Remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. But it tells us now in verses 1 that Moses is dead. But just because Moses is dead does not mean that the law has died. All right? And does not mean that the covenant has died, because that covenant was made not only with Moses, it was made with Abraham, it was made with Isaac, and it was made with Jacob. But just because these people are dead does not mean that that covenant is not still established. And even in 2024, fixed to be 2025, the covenant that God made with Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12 and Genesis chapter 15, that covenant is still true today for the nation of Israel. Will always be true, okay? But he tells us now in verses 13, remember the word of Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God hath given you this rest, or given you rest, and hath given you this land. Notice he doesn't say that you have had to buy it, you've had to bargain for it, you've had to do something for it. God has given it to you. He's given you not only rest, but he has given you land. And what they are doing, another thing, and I did not bring this up last week, one of the things that they were doing for 40 years when they were wandering in the wilderness, not only was it for punishment, but it was also for rest. So now that they have had 40 years of rest and they've had 40 years of remembrance, it says that God has given you rest and he has given you this land. Look in verses 14, your wives, your little ones, your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave to you on this side of Jordan. But, all right, in our lives as Christians, do you know that sometimes we are on the east side of Jordan and then sometimes we are on the west side of Jordan? Sometimes we may spend years on one side and years on the other. We have a habit or an ability to basically cross back over. And it seems like we don't get satisfied on this side, so we'll go back over here, and it's just, we kind of bounce back and forth. But what he is telling them now in verses 14, the wives, the kids, and the cattle, all right, is going to remain in the land which Moses gave unto you. This is verses 14, on this side of Jordan. But Ye shall pass before your children armed, or your brethren armed, all the mighty men of valor, and help them. They are allowed to come back on the east side, but they have to go on the west side to fight before they can claim what God or Moses had promised them back in Numbers chapter 32. Now look in verses 15. He does not give them a timeline. He gives them an until. All right? Until the Lord hath given your brethren rest. And more than likely, a conversation that probably happened hundreds, if not thousands of times when they were wandering the 40 years in the wilderness, and those believers or those children of God that believed that they were going to conquer the land, more than likely the one thing on their mind was a timetable. How long is this going to take? I mean, how long is it before we cross over Jordan? We set up camp. We've got all these people we're going to have to defeat. How long is it going to take to defeat Jericho? How long is it going to take to defeat Ai? How long is it going to take to defeat the Gibeonites? They want to probably know a timetable of when things are going to happen. But God does not give them a timetable, but He gives them an ending. He tells them this is going to happen, but I'm not going to tell you how long it's going to take. And one of the things we as Christians and people that come to church and that follow Christ, the one thing that we, especially in the last year, have been focusing on is a timetable of when is God coming back. With everything we've seen on the news and on social media, I've been asked a lot, is this a sign, everything that's happening, of the return of Christ? Well, everything that's been happening, I'm 52, for the last 52 years is a return of Christ. Before then, it's a sign of return of Christ. So, yes, we are concerned and we would like a timetable of when things are going to happen. But with verses 15, he says, until the Lord hath given you your brethren rest, and He hath given you. Notice that it is all about God. Everything, especially in the Old Testament, is about God. Absolutely everything. Because it tells us, it says, until the Lord hath given your brethren rest, as He hath given you, and they also have possessed the land which the Lord hath given them. If you look already in verses 15, the word giveth is used so far. We have not read all of the verse, is given 1, 2, 3 times. So how did the children of Israel get the nation of Israel? How did it come into their possession? It was a gift. God gave it to them. He gave that to them. And this is what is amazing. If God says He's going to give you something, He gives it to you. Do you remember when Jesus Christ was at the Last Supper and He tells these, and one of my favorite verses is this, peace I leave with you, not peace like the world, but my peace. Jesus is basically saying, I want to give you something. And He gives us a lot of promises in the Last Supper. But Jesus Christ says, I want to give you something that the world's not going to be able to give you. They may try to have a form of it, but it's not going to be the exact thing. It's not going to be the perfect. Jesus Christ says, I'm going to give you peace. What has our world been looking for since the beginning of time? Peace. What does Israel want? Peace. And He tells us in the Last Supper, peace I leave with you. And that word leave and giveth is the same word in Greek. I'm going to give this to you. It's yours to have. All right? It's not the peace that the world is going to give you. It is my peace. So we as Christians, we have something. We have a number of things that is connected to Christ. Okay, don't get me wrong in that. We have a number of things that we are connected to Christ with. But one of the great things that we are connected to Christ with, or that He gives us, the same thing that He carried around with Him, is peace. And He gives it to us. And it says, until the Lord hath given you, this is verses 15, your brethren rest, as He hath given you, and they also have possessed the land which the Lord your God giveth them, then, and only then, all right, ye shall return into the land of your possession, and guess what? Enjoy it. As our lives as Christians sometimes are fraught with trials and tribulations, but Jesus Christ says in this world you're going to have tribulations, but be of good cheer because I have what? overcome the world. I like the way he says that. I'm going to give you something, and you're going to enjoy it. In our lives as Christians, in all honesty, and I'm talking to myself too, out of the 7 days in a week, let's just do 7 days a week, how many of those days do we actually enjoy our Christian life? Of those 7 days, 30 minutes, an hour, or do we enjoy our Christian life 24/7? If we enjoyed our Christian life the way we enjoy stuff, wouldn't it be amazing? But he says, I'm going to give you this land and you're going to enjoy it. I like the way he says there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're going to like it. It's almost like when your mom sat you down at the table to eat, you're going to eat that and you're going to like it and you're going to swallow it, okay? But God basically says you're going to come back over and this land that I give you, give it 3 times. You're going to enjoy it, which Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you on this side of Jordan toward the sun rising. And they answered Joshua saying, this is what I love about the children of Israel. They're just like us, exactly like us. We have a small group that meets on Wednesday nights, and we did a small group working on Samson. And we actually talked about the book of Judges a little bit. And one thing about the book of Judges is that at the end of every chapter of the book of Judges, do you know what the children of Israel are saying? We're going to follow you, God. We learned our lesson. We're going to follow you. Listen, we get it. We understand. We done wrong. We're going to follow you. And then in that white space between the last verse of the chapter and in the first verse of the next chapter, something happens because it says, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of God. We're like that. We're exactly like that. And it says, and they answered, and they say this a lot to Joshua. We're going to do it. One of the great things I like is when Joshua says, you can serve your gods back there, but it's for me and my house what? I'm going to serve the Lord. And they're like, okay, if you're going to serve the Lord, Joshua, we're going to serve it. You get to the book of Judges, everything crumbles. And they answered Joshua saying, all that thou commanded us we will do. And whithersoever thou sendest us, we will go. There's an old gospel song called Children Go Where I Send Thee, How Shall I Send Thee? I want to see you know the song. That is what we should be as Christians. Jesus Christ in the book of Matthew, in the last book of, what does he tell them? Go. That's their commandment. Go, preach, baptize, make disciples. And with Joshua, before they put feet in water and before the Levites take up the Ark of the Covenant, go and set it in the middle and the water splits, they say, okay, we're going to do this. They've not crossed over yet. They've not raised a spear. They've not marched around. They've not done anything. And they're already telling Joshua, we're going to do this. Not only is it the children of Israel, but it's the Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. We are going to do this. Whatever you tell us to do, we'll do it. Whosoever, and it says, whosoever he that doeth rebel against thy commandment. Look in verses 18. There is a positive and a negative. The book of Deuteronomy, that is basically what the book of Deuteronomy is. It is a book of curses and blessings. If you do what I tell you to, you're going to be blessed. If you don't, you're going to be cursed. And just like in Joshua, in verses 17, there is verses 16 and 17, there is a blessing. We're going to do this. All right, great. But in verses 18, this is what he says. But if you do not, if you rebel against thy commandment and will not hearken to thy words, and all thou commandest him, he shall be what? Put to death. You know what that is? That's law. Anytime you study the law, there is 2 outcomes, life and death. That's it. With this, he does not tell them, if you go against my commandments and if you rebel against me, but after that, if you seek my face and you humble yourself and you seek my wisdom and you seek my grace and you seek my mercy, I'm going to forgive you. He doesn't say that. He says, if you go against what I tell you, you're going to die. What did he tell Adam and Eve back in the back book of Genesis? If you eat out of that tree, I want to kill you. If you ate out of it, I'm going to destroy you. Guess what happened? They ate out of the tree. Did they die instantly? No, but they died. But they died also spiritually. But God tells them now in verses 18, if you go against what I tell you, he shall be put to death. Wow. Okay, where's the grace there? It's not there. That's why the cross is so important, because it is flooded with God's grace and God's mercy. Only, you got two options, all right? Be strong and of good courage. That's great. 4 times in a chapter. So if something is repeated 4 times in a chapter of 18 verses, verses 6, 7, 18, I know there's another one in there, 9, is it important? It's pretty much important. And the reason God is commanding them to be strong and be of good courage, because God knows what they're about to have to come up against. Those people that they seen back in the book of Numbers, they're not dead. Those giants and those walled cities and those sons of Anak, they haven't died. They're still there. It's just like what we talked about Sunday, Goliath. For 40 days he was still there. And if David had not come off that hillside to defeat him, 40 days he would have still been there. Goliath would have died of old age. With this, he knows what they're about to go up against. And God knows this. And he wants to make sure that they are prepared. There is a blessing and then there is a cursing. You go over and do your job, everything's going to be great. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. Now, starting in verses 2, chapter 2, Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men. This is one of my most favorite chapters. And you will find out who one of these individuals is when you get to the book of Matthew and you start reading the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Rahab the harlot is in there. Boaz is in there. Ruth is in there. And you'll find out one of the spies' name that is, I think it's in Matthew chapter 1. All right, so he sends out 2 men to spy secretly, saying, go view the land, even Jericho. This is what's fascinating about these 2 guys. More than likely, these 2 guys that you find in chapter 2, verse 1, they were kids the first time those 12 spies went in. Could you imagine them being little old toe-headed kids? And they've sat there for 40 days and they've waited for those 12 men to come back and tell them what's going to happen. And them as little kids heard their moms and dads and their aunts and uncles say, we can't do it. There's no way. There's giants over there. They got walled cities. They've got this and we can't do it. And them as little kids growing up and hearing that curse from God saying, okay, your generation, your carcass is going to die in the wilderness. And these little kids are the ones that's going to go over. And all for the next 40 years, all these spies have heard, these 2 spies have heard is, why didn't y'all go over? Man, listen, they got these things over there called giants. And they have walls, and they have this, and they have that. We wouldn't have made it. We would have died over there. And all these spies have heard is this for 40 years. And now it comes time, guess what? You're going to have to go over there. He tells them, he says, go and view the land, even Jericho. And they went and they came unto a harlot's house named Rahab, and they lodged there. Isn't God amazing? How he always puts the right people, the right places, the right things, the right circumstances in for us when it is for his will. Because whatever God sends out, it is not going to come back void. It is going to reap. It is going to prosper. It is going to bear fruit. So when he sends these 2 spies out, everything that they are going to do, because they have already been promised in the previous chapter, if you'll just do what I say, it's going to be fine. So they send, and this is what's probably amazing. These 2 spies probably thought of everybody in Jericho, this is what we've got to run into. Of everybody that he could have sent us to, we got to run into somebody who is a Gentile harlot, unclean. You know, when Elijah, it's when Elijah goes to Ahab and he tells them for the next 3 years it's not going to rain. He tells them go by this little stream of water. You're going to lodge there. You're going to eat. Ravens are going to feed you. And when it runs out, he says, here's what I want you to go do. I want you to go to the Shunammite woman, and she's a Gentile. Don't you know Elijah probably thought of all the places he could have sent me is here. Of every place I could have went is here. You know, Crystal and I go on vacation. We like to go back roads. And we'll be South Alabama, South Georgia, whatever. And we'll pass by this little old church. And I usually say, man, I'm glad I ain't pastoring somewhere like that. And I got to stop doing that. Because I'm afraid he's like, okay, I'll show you. But more than likely, when they got there, they probably thought of all the places. Here we are. And in their minds, they're probably thinking, this ain't going to work. I mean, he sends us to this place. And to kind of give you a little background of how this worked, and you've heard this probably, in Jericho, these walls, it was not just one wall, it was several walls, and they would have a space in between it. You'd have these walls that were 50 foot high, 100 foot high. But anyway, in between these walls was living space. And what would happen is you would have these walls that went around, and you'd have these little doors and stairs that went on the outside of the inside of these walls. And that's where people lived at. They didn't live necessarily inside Jericho. They lived inside the walls. So there might be 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 walls, you know, and then you'd have little alleyways inside there. That is how they would live. And they would have little windows in these walls. So they're in between walls, okay? So they came to this house, this harlot's house named Rahab, and we went over this before on a Sunday, I believe. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, all right, behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. How did he know that? And again, we've went over this before, so if I've said something, you're probably going to hear it again. How long has the children of Israel been marching around in that wilderness? 40 years. So if you got 4 million people stomping around in dirt, you know what it's going to make a lot of? Dust. Be a big dust cloud out there. And if you ever look at those maps and you watch anything, where they wandered around at, it's not real big. It's not ginormous. So more than likely, every day when that king got up, he seen a big dust cloud across Jericho. And he probably thought, what in the world is that? Next day he got up, big dust cloud way over the horizon. And he might see 2 or 3 Israelites pop their heads up over hills every now and then. For 40 years they've seen this. And then probably somebody gets word to him, and we'll look at this a little bit later on. That bunch that's over there, they're going to come over here one of these days. The children of Israel, or these 2 spies going in and spying out the land to find out what they need to do and how they are going to conquer it, is a type of the Holy Spirit and a type of Christ. They are coming in to figure out how they are going to, first of all, destroy and then to save. Destroy these individuals, but save the land. Destroy these individuals, but save a prostitute and her family. Jesus Christ says, I came to seek and to save the first time. The second time, am I coming to seek and to save? No, I'm coming to destroy. So it tells us in verses 2, I'm about to quit. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, there's 2 guys that came over here, and they're from the children of Israel, and they're in our country. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab. They know everything. This has got to be the worst battle plan you'll ever hear. There's no undercover of night. There's no, like Rambo going in to get the POW. It's nothing like that. The king knows they're there. Everybody knows they're there. The word is spread. There's spies in the land. You would think that the king would go and find these 2 people and kill them. But who is fighting actually for these 2 spies? God. It's not going to happen. Okay? And it says, and the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, he knows they're there. He could have held her hostage and said, if you don't bring them out, you better tell your mom and dad and your brother and sister, if they don't bring these out, I'm going to kill you. It's not a failed mission in the least on God's side. It's a perfect mission. On their side, it's a failed mission. Notice how many missed opportunities they had. If you think about it, all right? And if you were planning out this strategy, so far in 2 verses, they know everything that's happening. Just not the common peasant. The president of Jericho knows what is happening. News has been leaked. There's 2 spies. So he goes and he sent unto Rahab, saying, bring forth the men. that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out the country. They know. And the women took the two men and hid them, and said thus, there came men unto me, and the woman, and I wist not whence they were. She lied. And what did we tell our kids? There's no lie, there's no lie. Okay, is it? And we say, well, she shouldn't have lied about this. Okay, do you know who we're dealing with? We're dealing with Rahab the harlot. All she's ever known is Jericho. All she's ever known is lying. All she's ever known is this world's oldest profession. That's all she's ever known. You can't expect her to be perfect. You can't expect her to be saved. You can't expect her to be sanctified. She don't know anything. This is all she knows. That's why God sent them there. A well-respected, upstanding person of the community would have said, guys have gave up. I'm going to have to send you over there, collect my ransom. Everything's going to fall apart. God knew exactly where and to who he was sending these two individuals. But she tells the king, I have no idea what you're talking about. We can't blame her. She is a product of her environment. All right? I want to quit on this one. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, and when it was dark, that the men went out. Whether the men went, I was not know. Pursue after them quickly, and ye shall overtake them. But she had brought them. This is what she tells the king. They was here, but before you closed the gates, they ran out. And if you send a few guys out, pretty quick you might can catch them. But this is what she does. And she had brought them up into the roof of her house, and hid them with stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. Do you know what is amazing about these roofs? There's been miracle after miracle after miracle take place in the Bible on top of roofs of houses. You have a miracle here. When the guy that was paralyzed, that couldn't walk, and his friends took him, where did they take him to? To the roof. Do you know where Peter was praying at when the Lord descended upon him with that sheet in the book of Acts? On the roof. Do you know where Cornelius was praying when he was told there was going to come a messenger? On a roof. It's amazing how God uses certain geographical locations, and it's almost identical in every story. There's several stories about roofs of houses in the Old and New Testament, but just those 4 stories tells us that God is always going to be there. But if you look in the book of Revelations, there is a warning that is given, and we're fixing to close. You remember he says, when you see everything starts happening and the world starts falling apart and these tribulations start happening, if you go up on your roof, what does he say to do? You better stay there. Don't come off of it. So here's the question I want to ask you. When is the last time you went on top of your roof and met with God? Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. Dear God, we love you because you are a merciful, gracious God. Dear God, we have never done nothing, we'll never be able to do anything to earn, dear God, salvation. Surgeries, we lift them up for the throne of grace. Most Father God, for the ones that do not know you as Savior. God, we ask you to save for us everlasting freedom. We love you and we thank you because you first loved us. In your name we pray.
Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Listen, your grace is more. What grace is found is very rare. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is what we need. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my soul to rise to you. When temptations comes my way, when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. Worship Your holy name. Sun comes up, it's a new day dawn. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before, let me be singing when the evening comes. So bless the Lord, my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. Worship Your holy name. Rich in love my time has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending.
We're good. So they.
Huh?